This week's online learning content is going to be fairly simple as I just kind of go through how you might start working through the practical task in AutoCAD. And so what I want you to start learning is how to derive many of these drawings from other drawings. So for an example here, we have a wall that I've used in some of the other videos before, and I'm just going to create a section off of this. And what you'll learn through this video is how easy this practical task is right now. So all I'm really going to do is create a line that's going to represent where I'm going to cut a section through this wall. So I'm just going to place it sort of randomly right now. Now, quite easily, and this is going to seem fairly basic as we go through it, but these are just the same steps and techniques you would use to create drawings from other drawings, whether it was a brick wall or anything else. So in our case here, we know the brick wall is fairly simple. So what we might do instead of creating lines, but what I would do is if I was creating a section, I would create a section. Essentially, I'm going to cut it here and draw it off to the right. So what I'm going to do is actually just create a few other construction lines for myself by using XL for extended line, and then just dropping them at the top and bottom of the wall, and then the top of one brick. Now I could go through and just do this for each and every brick, but you'll see that the brick's the exact same size, it's a module, it's not really going to matter. So what I'm going to do is establish over here where I'm going to start drawing my section. So I'm going to do another vertical line just kind of anywhere at this point. With my guidelines in place, I'm just going to come down and create a rectangle that represents the section of the brick. So I'm going to start the rectangle command, rectangle command from that corner, use the down arrow to get dimensions, 110 millimeters by 76 millimeters tall, and click to accept it. So I'm going to erase this line so there's not overlapping, but we can see I have my brick here. Now it's quite simple at this point to just create a section of the wall, of the brick wall, just by creating an array. Right? So if I just select this and I start the array command, right, we want a rectangular array, we want one column, we want, oh, I don't know what it is, 35 rows or so. Let's see what it comes out to. In between, we want 76 plus 10, so 86, right? So which gives us almost 3 meters. So we can go back and change this to 36. Oops, 36. 38. There we go. 37. Sorry, getting there. Wasn't sure if it was updating, but that's close enough. And then we'll say close it, and we have our array, right? And by exploding this array, I now have access to all of these. And then I can use the match command, selecting that, hitting MA for match. And looks like I'm not quite at the top of my wall. Not a problem, just delete those bricks. And essentially I have a section, right? I can change the line weight. And because this is just a flat planar wall, we have nothing in elevation, so we have basically this as a starting point. And this is what I would suggest you do. You take your other wall, you might have some voids in it, so there would be some voids maybe cut through. You can start from a wall that you liked and begin to start pushing and pulling from there. So what I would do now is start grabbing each rectangle and start moving them in a formulaic or systematic way. So now I'll grab one, I'll make sure ortho is locked, and I'll say, all right, let's start moving each one 5 millimeters. All right, so if I move that one 5, I'll have to move this one 10. All right, so what I'm doing is making a subtle shift in a movement of the wall, just by starting to alter these little by little. So I'm adding a 5 millimeter shift in this case for each one. All right, so I'm starting to play with that pushing and pull to get a pattern, and we still are concentrating on this subtlety, this gradient pattern that allows us to get a smooth reading. Almost think of this as a fabric that you're trying to generate just some subtle, easy transitions to. You're not really trying to create a harsh condition, but if you are, you can begin to do that, but do it with control. because there'll be a point where there's an edge, that line. So when we talk about that gradient, that line, that subtle transition from a normative condition to some other condition, this is what we're trying to create here. Now what will happen with this is you will still have bricks in the background. So we're just creating, right now if we're designing by section, I'm just kind of starting to, let's say I want a maximum movement here. I'm going to offset this, 1000, because that's our maximum volume. And you'll see that's actually quite a bit, right? In order to get that thing to move that far is kind of crazy. So hopefully you're not using that full volume there. But maybe we want to move this out, offset it 300 millimeters or 30, right? So what I'll keep doing is moving this 5 millimeters out until I get to that 30. Right. And it is a tedious task. I know it's a tedious task, but this is sometimes I need to move it 5. Sorry. What design is about? It's about this tedious. What you might find is 5 is actually too subtle, right? So you might want to start increasing that to something else, to something larger. But this is what I mean by that systematic approach. And then it could be that it could be right now just with AutoCAD you're experimenting visually and not numerically. So maybe what I'm doing is saying let's say at this point I want this to be all the way out to here. So instead of really getting caught up on the numbers, we could easily just start visually doing it until we get something that starts to work, and then you can start to get this down numerically. But right now we'll just eyeball it because I don't have a ton of time through this video. All right, so we're starting to get a pattern. It's really not that gradient. I would probably want to start shifting these a little bit more. But you can see how you can start designing in section. This is not an appropriate connection, right? If I want to start coming back over, I need to start moving this back. All right, so all I really want you guys to do right now is just do some of this in section and start playing with some of the subtleties, some of these transitions that you can get through the push and pulling. Maybe you want to create a repetitious pattern. How do you begin to do that? Maybe right now it's just about subtly making this indentation in the wall, but also part of the section. Once you have this down, right, there we go, right? Once you have something like this down, you might say, okay, well, I need to create that section a little bit further down. So maybe you copy this over and say, all right, well, now I need this to actually start returning more to normal. So I'll just kind of move this, without any snaps. I'll move this to an intermediary condition. Turn the snaps off for now. And then start moving these to get a less dramatic condition. Right? And what this will start to do is allow you to have that keyframe that I'm talking about. I'm going to pause this while I finish this, and then I'll come right back. Okay, so I have my second one done, my second section, and I could do a couple more, but what we have to determine now is, all right, I like the way this is working, I like how it's getting a little more subtle, and it would go back to a normal condition at another point. I need to consider now how far along the wall I would want that to happen. So I've determined that, let's say one of them started here, or the most extreme point might be here. I might say that, let me just copy this over, at a certain point about here, and I'm just eyeballing at this point. It's just an exercise for you to start getting familiar with the push and pull and start to use that and understand how it works. All right, so I might say that it needs to happen over that whole period there. So you can see that I don't really have to recreate this elevation because in elevation this wall is going to look identical. But what will happen in elevation, and what I can start to put out here, is we will be establishing some depth with this now. So I can say, okay, these are my limits of this. So I know with these bricks in here, they're going to start pushing back. So maybe I start altering some of the line weights in there. This also might be a good time if you want, and I don't care if you do, start moving into Rhino, where you can take these sections, export them into Rhino, and start pushing and pulling there. Right, so all I really want you to do this week, right now, before we start really getting into what all these drawings do, is just start playing with this idea of push and pull, this idea of subtlety. Notice how these are just subtle movements, and they're still structurally feasible. I could still think that this works. Right? And this would also force me to have to come back in here and start drawing in elevation those other lines behind. All right, so I'd have to start saying, all right, well, maybe this is the maximum movement of a brick. If I copy this over, this starts to help you define how many bricks along the row, or how far they're going to move as well. So if I start copying this, boy, get these to work right. There we go. All right, I know that it's starting to move 1 brick, 2 brick, and that might be too much of a transition, but that translates into bricks over here. So this is that 1 brick in elevation, the next brick in elevation. All right, so we're starting to see them through there. I can take this and really get an understanding of how many bricks it would take to actually move that distance. And it might be that these, like I was saying, these are too close. In order to get that distance that I marked out initially, I might have to use smaller dimensions. But it's a give and take, right? We have to start looking what's happening here and seeing the reaction on the elevation as well. And then we also move to 3 dimensions to see how that starts to work there as well. So it's just a quick introduction on how to start using the section. Notice I used the section to design my 2 extreme or 2 keyframe conditions, as I'm calling them. And then I'm going back to the elevation, or using the elevation in the section to start determining where I move these. You could start from a running bond. You can start from what you've done before. If you start with a pattern that you liked previously, then you already have a lot more constants, as I call them, things that are already in place. So you have voids that will come into play, and you might learn that you have to start altering the voids in order to get the patterns to start working with you. So it's a fairly simple, practical task. Again, it's just I want you to start getting familiar with the section and how to use AutoCAD and the drawings together in order to start designing.